Dave Talks Comics, Episode 87, Ghost in the Machine, Cadmus Exposed, and Brave New Metropolis. Welcome to Dave Talks Comics, a program on the subjects of comic books and cartoons. I talk about comic books I have read and cartoons I have watched. I talk from my notes. I don't go panel by panel or scene by scene. I try to do more than just summarize the stories. This program is not spoiler-free. I try not to spoil everything, but in the process of talking about these comic books and cartoons, I will probably spoil them in some way. On this episode of Dave Talks Comics, I will begin by talking about an episode of Superman the Animated Series from Season 2 called Ghost in the Machine. Then I will move on to a feature, an extra special feature on one of the DVDs from Justice League Unlimited called Cadmus Exposed. And then finally, I will talk about another episode of Superman the Animated Series, also from Season 2, called Brave New Metropolis. Superman the Animated Series, Ghost in the Machine, is the 15th episode, but the 14th story from the second season. And at first glance, this would seem to be a story about Brainiac and Lex Luthor, but if you look at it a little more closely, this is really a spotlight of sorts on Mercy Graves, who is Lex Luthor's bodyguard and driver. This is a woman, and I'm going to get into that. So, the episode opens with a demonstration at the LexCorp building in Metropolis of the Sky Sentry, which is this anti-missile defense system. And of course something goes wrong, and Superman has to save the day. I should mention here that Lois appears in this episode, but she's not a big part of the story. So this demonstration goes wrong. Luthor doesn't understand what went wrong. It's clear that this wasn't something he had planned, because his demonstration was he announces to everybody that he has had some Sidewinder missiles fired at the building, and that the Sky Sentry system is going to take out these Sidewinder missiles, so they don't have anything to be worried about. And of course, everybody panics at first. And then, of course, the defense system fails, but Superman saves the day, as I said before. So the Sky Sentry kind of gets put into mothballs, and Lex Luthor goes back to his office, and he gets a mysterious call at that point. And it tells him to come down to Sector 6, which is the R&D lab. And so he does that. And he disappears into Sector 6, and kind of nobody knows what happens to him. But what has happened to him, Brainiac is down in Sector 6, and Brainiac is the one who sabotaged Luthor's demonstration of the Sky Sentry, and Brainiac needs him to build a new body for him, because at the moment he is just a piece of software on one of Lex's machines. And at first, Luthor doesn't want anything to do with it, but then it turns out that Brainiac has all these drones. Now, here's where I want to take a little left turn, and that's these drones kind of remind me of the Tachikoma from the Ghost in the Shell TV show, which I haven't actually watched in full, but there are these machines called the Tachikoma, and these drones look a little bit like that. And the fact that this episode is called Ghost in the Machine, Ghost in the Shell, so that kind of makes me think that was also a callback to Ghost in the Shell, at least the TV. Well, actually, you know what? Now that I think about it, this episode, I'm pretty sure came out before the Ghost in the Shell TV show. I'm going to have to check on that. Yeah. I'm going to have to check on that because I'm pretty sure this episode came out in the mid-90s. And I'm not sure when the Ghost in the Shell TV show came out. I'm pretty sure the movie had already come out at that point, but I can't remember if the Tachikoma were in the movie. Anyway, getting back to this episode of Superman, the animated series. So Lex disappears. He's being forced by Brainiac to finish this body, which these drones have put together for Brainiac, but they don't have the skill to put on the finishing touches. He needs Luthor to do that for him. So he creates. So he's got Luthor down there working on this. So in the meanwhile, Superman is investigating this, trying to figure out what's going on. So he goes because he's concerned about the Sky Sentry system. And as Clark Kent, he goes to Luthor's building and threatens to write a piece about Luthor's system, saying that there's something fishy about it, because because of the malfunction the other day. And while he's there, he uses his X-ray vision to look into Luthor's office. And even though they claim that Luthor's in his office, he can see that he's not in his office. So he manages to get past Mercy Graves, Luthor's bodyguard, and reveals that Luthor's not in there. It turns out that they also thought that Luthor was in his office, his secretary and his bodyguard, Mercy. So at this point, you kind of get this team up between Superman and Mercy to find Lex, to figure out what happened to Lex Luthor. So she looks into it. She starts reviewing the videotapes on her own, not with Superman. And she figures out that Lex, the last time he was seen, was going down to Sector 6. And in this way, she is really the key to this episode. It's both that she's the one she does this, and then later on, so she finds this stuff, then she gets attacked, and the drones start coming after her, presumably because Brainiac is monitoring things and is concerned that she'll reveal this information to Superman. Well, it's a little late because Superman shows up. They defeat the drones that Brainiac has sent after them, and then they head down to Sector 6 where they find Luthor and Brainiac. Now, just before they get down there, Luthor attempts to escape, and Brainiac shoots him with a bolt, with a blast. Now, this blast is the reason why I went back to watch this episode, because if you remember from when I talked about Justice League Unlimited, the Cadmus story arc, this blast, it's revealed in there that is when Brainiac injected a nano version of himself into Luthor's body. And that's how he survives. And that's how he's able to show up at the end of the Cadmus Project story arc. But at this point, it's just Brainiac shooting Luthor and knocking him down. So right about then is when Superman and Mercy show up. And a fight ensues with Brainiac. At first, it isn't going well for them. Then Mercy, once again, playing a key role, suggests that Superman use the Sky Sentry, which is in mothballs down there which is stored down there in Sector 6, the R&D lab. So he uses the Sky Sentry and is able to beat Brainiac. Now, there's still stuff falling down. There's a lot of damage. Luthor gets pinned under something. Mercy, once again, playing an important role, saves Luthor, pulls this heavy piece of equipment off of him. She doesn't have super strength, but she's able to, hold it in place long enough so he can scramble out. Then he starts running for the exit because all sorts of stuff is coming down. Then she gets trapped. Well, she has a devotion to Luthor that Luthor does not reciprocate. And this is something which is mentioned earlier in the episode when Clark Kent is asking Lois Lane about Mercy. He says, he's saying he doesn't understand why she works for him, why she continues to work for him. And Lois is like, well, obviously, there's, you don't understand some things, implying that Mercy has a romantic or a interest in Lex. So when Lex gets trapped, Mercy helps him out. Then he starts to leave the room. She gets trapped then by more falling machinery, and he takes one look and then just takes off. He doesn't go back to help her. Superman has to help her. So that's more or less the end of this episode. I mean, the big thing about this episode is really that relationship between it's Mercy. It's a spotlight on Mercy Graves, and it's about her relationship with Lex. The use of this in the future episodes of Justice League Unlimited to indicate that this is when Brainiac injected a nano version of himself into Luthor. That's something that was completely retrofitted. That is not something that they thought of doing at that point. But the crux of the episode is, and it's nice to see this because you don't always get this, an episode where they focus on a minor character. And honestly, I've watched this episode twice. So the first time I watched it, I thought it was all about Brainiac and Luthor. And watching it the second time, which I did just before I recorded this, I have to say it's much clearer that this episode is about Mercy and Luthor and about their relationship. And it's worth saying that she has shown up a number of times prior to this in Superman the Animated Series. I think she only had 2 appearances in Justice League, and 1 appearance in Justice League and 1 appearance in Justice League Unlimited, and certainly no spotlight episodes. So that's my take on Superman Ghost in the Machine. If you haven't seen it and you've watched the Cadmus arc, you may want to watch this. If you haven't seen the Cadmus arc and you're curious about that, you may want to go back and watch some of these episodes like Ghost in the Machine before you watch that. Cadmus Exposed is a extra feature. It's one of the extras on the Justice League Unlimited Season 2, they call it, which is really Season 3. It's the last 13 episodes of Justice League Unlimited. Anyway, this is an extra on the first disc of that set. It's a 2-disc set. And it's about the length of an episode of Justice League Unlimited. It's a discussion about the Cadmus storyline, which ran all through seasons 1 and 2 of Justice League Unlimited, which on DVD are referred to just as season 1. The moderator is Mark Hamill, the actor who, in terms of the DC animated universe, is best known for playing the part of the Joker. And the other members of this discussion are the producers of Justice League Unlimited, Bruce Timm, Dwayne McDuffie, and James Tucker. Now they talk about, one of the things that surprised me was that they opened by talking about the Cadmus story arc is just an 8-episode arc. Now there are 26 episodes in those first 2 seasons, and there are definitely elements in both seasons that are tied to the Cadmus story arc, some more integrally than others. I did think it was interesting that they referred to Fearful Symmetry as the first part of the Cadmus storyline. It definitely is the first part of the Cadmus storyline, although there are character things going all the way back to the first episode, which is Initiation, and I talked about that on an earlier episode of Dave Talks Comics. But they seem to think that there's only 8 episodes that make up the Cadmus story, and there are definitely episodes in there which have absolutely nothing to do with the Cadmus story arc, other than the fact that they kind of flesh out some of the characters who play a role in the Cadmus storyline. Episodes like Double Date, where you have Green Arrow and Black Canary and the Huntress and the Question, all of whom, well, especially Green Arrow and the Huntress and the Question play an important role in there. They did admit to, and this is something I mentioned before, they did admit to the fact that there was a lot of things that they retrofitted from previous episodes to say that these were things that were to make it look like the Cadmus storyline was much bigger than it actually was. To say that this ties in from an episode of Superman. For instance, I've talked about Superman Legacy, which was the final story of Superman the Animated Series, where Superman got brainwashed by Darkseid and granted goodness and came to Earth to try and take over Earth. And that's used in the Cadmus storyline as an example. They talked a little bit about the Cadmus comic book, because Cadmus actually was a story in the comic books. It's come up a number of times in the comic books, but it didn't have the political angle that it has in the cartoons. It was much more of a group of scientists plotting something. And there's definitely scientists involved here. You got Professor Hamilton, and I think Professor Ivo, I think, is in there at one point. But the big thrust of it is that this is a political issue. And they talked about how Cadmus sees themselves as the good guys, and how Cadmus, that they're the ones doing the good things, that they're the ones working, they represent the government, not the Justice League, and that they're the ones doing the good things, and how Cadmus and the JLU are really two sides of the same coin, because they both see themselves as doing the right thing. They both see themselves as the good guys. At this point, they talked a little bit about some of the voice actors they worked with. They talked about CCH Pounder, who plays the role of Amanda Waller, and J.K. Simmons, who plays the role of General Eiling. And then they got into talking about some of the episodes, especially some of the Season 2. I think these were all, I'm not sure that these were all Season 2 episodes now that I think about it. They talked about Task Force X. Yeah, I think that was in Season 1. And how the importance of telling the story from the point of view of the government. And that's really what you get in there. And I think I even mentioned that in the episode where I talked about Task Force X. And also the importance that the government wins, or you could say the bad guys win. And part of the reason why that was important was it made them a credible threat. That these Task Force X was able to sneak their way onto the Justice League satellite, the Watchtower as it's sometimes called, and infiltrate it and steal stuff from the Watchtower and then escape. Although I think one of them got left behind in that episode. But still, it made them a credible threat. They talked about the episode called Clash, which is the one that Captain Marvel shows up in, and Captain Marvel is defending Lex Luthor, and Superman knows that there's a bomb underneath this housing development that Lex Luthor has built, but of course Captain Marvel doesn't have X-ray vision, so he can't see it, and he thinks that Superman's getting out of control, and this fight ensues. And part of the reason for doing this was that it creates a contrast between Superman and Captain Marvel. So Captain Marvel isn't just another strong superhero who can fly, and he's also even more naive than Superman is sometimes portrayed as being. I mean, Superman is often portrayed as being a Boy Scout, and here we've got somebody who basically has the brain of a 10-year-old, or the brain of a 10-year-old, I guess would be a good way to put it. And that's what they said. That's the way they envision Captain Marvel, because he hasn't always played that way. They talked about Panic in the Sky a little bit, and one of the things they brought up was one of my favorite subjects, which is how the question in this episode is planning to murder Lex Luthor. He's got this wacky idea that this will solve everything, that if he kills Lex Luthor, then Superman can't. But just the fact that they did this in a cartoon, that, and Bruce Timm talks about this. It's also worth saying at this point that Bruce Timm does a lot of the talking in this. He doesn't do all of the talking, but he does a lot of the talking in this. James Tucker and Dwayne McDuffie also get some words in edgewise, and also get to make some good points and bring up some interesting anecdotes. But Bruce Timm does a lot of the talking. They talked about the question in The Huntress and how even when they were making the episode Double Date, which I believe is in the second season, they hadn't really planned it out. They didn't envision the important roles that the Question and the Huntress would play in the whole Cadmus storyline. Because Double Date really doesn't have anything to do with the Cadmus storyline. It's really a Huntress story, and I think when I talked about that episode, I talked about how that was based on they don't actually say that, but a lot of the elements from that come from the Batman Huntress Cry for Blood, which you can get, which is a very good story, and maybe one day I will review that. They talked about how there was 2 climaxes in the series. How you have a climax with the League against the government, and the Ultimen and Galatea, who are all representing the government, in Panic in the Sky, and then you got a second climax in Divided We Fall, the next to last episode in season 2, where the League is taking on Luthor and Brainiac. They talked about a scrapped idea, which was, they talked about at one point they were thinking about having Batman quit the League and form his own team. And they didn't really go into too much detail on that, except for to say that they couldn't see a way that it could work with the story they had going. It just couldn't work out, and so they shoved it aside. But I guess it was something that they would have liked to have done. And then the final episode they talked about was, of course, the final episode of Season 2, which is Epilogue. And they talked about how, it was an attempt to wrap everything up, and they didn't know that there would be a Season 3, and a little bit about some of the Easter eggs in there. And then finally, they wrapped this whole thing up by talking about the ambiguity of the situation in the Cadmus storyline, and who is right, the League or the government. And it's not really clear if you think about it, I mean, the League is operating of their own volition. They're not, of their own authority. They're not really responsible to anybody other than themselves. And this is an issue that comes up in the course of this Cadmus storyline, especially towards the end. Well, even in the beginning, it's mentioned. Because this is what pushes the government to create Project Cadmus in the Justice League Unlimited cartoon. So they talk about that, and they talk about how it's not clear, and then finally I just want to touch on what was missing, what didn't they touch on, because I listened to this in great detail. I've watched it twice now, and if there's one thing that they did not talk about that I wish they had brought up, and I guess in a way it really doesn't tie real strongly into Cadmus, but it's Green Arrow. Because I really like the role that Green Arrow plays in these 24 episodes. He's not in every single episode, but over the course of this, or 26, I keep saying 24, I don't know why. Over the course of these 26 episodes, he plays an important role. He's there in the first episode, he's there in the last episodes, he's there in a number of the episodes in between. So I wish they had talked about Green Arrow. That said, it's a lot of fun. It's really neat to see these guys talking about this. They obviously enjoyed doing this, and it's definitely worth watching. It's part of as I said before, it's part of the Season 2 on DVD is what they call it. Season 2 of Justice League Unlimited, which was actually Season 3 when they broadcast it on TV. And it's one of the extras on that set. And if you enjoyed the Cadmus story, or if you can find it some other way, if you enjoyed the Cadmus story, then it's definitely worth a watch. Brave New Metropolis is a pretty good episode of Superman the Animated Series that I just watched. And honestly, I can't remember watching it before. And the reason why that's kind of funny is because it's on the Season 2 box set. Now, I was cleaning up the other day, and I ran across the Season 2 box set. This is of Superman the Animated Series. And it's kind of funny because I went out and I bought the episode Ghost in the Machine, because I thought I didn't have the Season 2 box set. I thought I only had Seasons 1 and Season 3. But apparently I did. When I was looking for a book, I ran across Season 2. So I had heard about this episode, Brave New Metropolis, when I watched the Cadmus Exposed special feature, and one of the creators, I think Dwayne McDuffie, mentioned it there. And I'll get into why what that has to do with Cadmus. But this is a really cool episode. It's basically a Lois Lane story. Superman, well, the real Superman, or the Superman, only appears in it very briefly at the end. So the way this episode opens at Star Labs, and Lois and Jimmy Olsen are visiting Professor Hamilton, and Professor Hamilton had built this device which is supposed to allow him to see into other dimensions, and there's some mention made of the Phantom Zone projector, and I think it's based on that technology. And at first it seems like it doesn't work, but then Lois notices something, that if you're looking into this device, through this device, you can see the rest of the building, of the inside of the room, but if you're looking through it, it looks different than if you're standing off to the side. And so she kind of steps up to it, and she's like, hey, wait a minute, this thing is working. And then she steps into it, and the next thing you know, she gets sucked into this parallel dimension, or parallel universe, as I like to think about it. And so at first she's like, wait a minute, where am I? And she notices that all the windows are broken, and the lab is all run down, and Jimmy and Professor Hamilton are gone. And so then she takes off walking, because Star Labs isn't in downtown Metropolis. So she walks to Metropolis, and one of the first things she comes across is this statue. And on one side, it's a monument, and on one side it's Superman's head, and on the other side it's Luthor's head, and at the bottom it says, the men who saved Metropolis. So she's like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And then she runs into Dan Turpin, the cop, but his uniform is very different than it normally is, because I think usually he's a plainclothes detective, I think, and he's wearing a uniform. And at first he tries to arrest her because she's out after curfew, but then there's an explosion, and so he goes running off to investigate that, and she goes after him, and she sees a bunch of guys stealing something from a LexCorp building, and one of the people is Jimmy Olsen, and Jimmy runs into her, and he's got long hair, and he's kind of got, he hasn't shaved, so he doesn't have a beard, but he's got some scruff on his face, and it turns out he's stealing kryptonite from LexCorp. And she finds out from him that that Lois Lane in this parallel universe is actually dead and was killed by Intergang, and that this led to Superman teaming up with Lex Luthor because he wanted to make Metropolis safer, and he saw that as being the best way to do it. So then she gets arrested along with Jimmy and a bunch of others in a raid on the place where they're all living, which is kind of down in the sewers someplace, or down in I guess it's kind of like the sewers, or an abandoned building or something like that. And she runs into Mercy Graves at that point, and Mercy in the regular universe is Lex Luthor's bodyguard and his chauffeur. And so Mercy when she sees Lois, she's like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Because, Lois is supposed to be dead in this universe. So she takes Lois to see Luthor, and apparently they've run DNA tests on her by that point, and they're like, no, that's definitely Luthor. Or I'm sorry, that's definitely Lois. And everything checks out. And so basically, Luthor tells Mercy to kill her, to kill. And so she's taking Lois outside, somewhere away from the building to kill her. And then Lois manages to grab Mercy's gun and gets away. And then she's on the run from the police. And she ends up climbing up that monument to Luthor and Superman. And this is one of these ridiculous scenes, I think, because she's climbing up this monument, and there's no clear way to climb up this monument. She's just somehow climbing up the monument. As far as I can tell, there's no handholds or places to place your feet. It looks very smooth. And, for the most part around, there's nowhere to really grip things to climb up. She's not Spider-Man. I mean, come on. But anyway, she climbs up the monument. She's getting shot at by these helicopters. She's still got the gun, and she fires back a few times, manages to take out the spotlight on the helicopter. And then she gets to the top of the monument, and she almost falls off, and she's saved by Superman. And then she and Superman talk, and she explains to him, that Luthor tried to have her killed. He explains to her, kind of what Jimmy had said, which is that he teamed up with Luthor because he wanted to make Metropolis a safer place after she had been killed. And she explains to him that Luthor just tried to have her killed, and that just changes everything for Superman. And so they go after Luthor together. And they confront Luthor, but Luthor's got kryptonite, the kryptonite that Jimmy had stolen. And so he uses that, and then this mob shows up led by Jimmy, and so then Luthor goes running off, still has the kryptonite. Mercy tries to escape, but Lois knocks her down, and then the mob is on top of her. And then there's, the scene, and the fight kind of ends with Superman chasing Luthor. Luthor takes off in a plane, and Superman chases him, and Luthor's still got the kryptonite, and it seems like Luthor gets killed in the end, but of course you can never tell with these things, and it is a parallel universe anyway. So in the end, Superman of this parallel universe and Lois go back to Star Labs, and she goes back through the portal to her own universe, but before she does, she kisses Superman, and apparently, from what I read online, this was the first time in this series that Lois kissed Superman. Although, yeah, it's parallel universe Superman. It's not the Earth 1 Superman, or however you want to think of him as. And then at the end, you see Superman flying with Lois, the regular Earth 1 Superman flying with Lois, and she suggests that they have dinner, and he kind of balks at that a little bit, and he agrees, but he only after voicing a little bit of, after balking at this, and he says, well, isn't that getting a little personal, Lois, and I thought that was pretty funny. So overall, I thought this was a really cool episode. One of the things that I really liked about it was the designs. The policemen were all in black and gray, and they had instead of having like a badge, they had like a diamond logo on their chests, kind of like the S is on Superman's chest. And also the Luthor buildings all had this Luthor logo, which was the Luthor L, which you would see in the animated series, except for the L was once again in a diamond shape, inside a diamond. Kind of like, once again, Superman's logo. And then even Luthor was dressed in black and gray and white. I'm not sure if that's the same in like the Superman the Animated Series and in Justice League Unlimited, if those were the colors he normally wore, but it certainly agreed with the colors of the policemen and the guards. And also, and then finally, the final design I should mention is Superman's design, which is, normally his costume is blue and red and gold, and in this case, it was black. It was red, black, and gray, and for the most part, it's black and gray with the S being in red, and being a lightning bolt also, kind of like the SS from World War II. And he didn't have a cape. So I really like the designs for this episode. Honestly, the animation in this episode wasn't perfect. I think the same can be said for the animation in Ghost in the Machine. It's not as good as the animation it's good, it's decent, it's no worse than it's at the level of the animation of like Batman the Animated Series, but by the time they got to Justice League Unlimited, I thought they really made some improvements in the quality of the animation had improved. And of course, if you really want to see some great animation from the DC animated universe, you should watch some of the movies like the Return of the Joker from the Batman Beyond movie. And then finally, the final thing I should mention is that this is an obvious precursor to A Better World, which is from the second season of Justice League. And A Better World is the one where the Justice League goes to a parallel universe where they discover everything went wrong when the Flash got killed by... Was it the Flash was killed by Luthor, I think? I think that's what it was. Or do they even specify? I can't remember now. But, so, I mean, it's an obvious, like, in this case, it's when Lois got killed, Superman went bad. Superman teamed up with Luthor. In that case, when the Flash got killed, Superman killed... Oh, no, wait a minute. Yes, it was after the Flash got killed that the Justice League flipped out and Superman killed Luthor. Which was, part of that whole thing where... getting into that whole thing where the Question makes me think of that part where the Question thinks he can prevent the whole thing from happening in the Cadmus storyline by killing Luthor, so Superman can't kill Luthor. But anyway, it's a really cool episode, and as Dwayne McDuffie mentions in Cadmus Exposed, this is kind of the beginning of all this alternate universe kind of stuff that they did in Superman and in Justice League Unlimited, which eventually led to the Cadmus story arc. And so it's definitely worth watching if you have any interest in the DC animated universe or Superman or alternate universe Superman. Definitely worth watching. Following up on a couple things that I talked about in this episode. First, the tachykoma, which I mentioned when I was talking about the Ghost in the Machine. The tachykoma were from Ghost in the Shell. The TV series is where I saw them. Now, I questioned whether they had first appeared, where they first appeared, and whether they had appeared in Ghost in the Shell before they appeared in that episode of Superman the Animated Series. Now, the Ghost in the Shell manga first appeared in 1989, although that was not the only... There was later mangas of Ghost in the Shell, which appeared several years later. The movie was from 1995, and the TV show, the original TV show, was from 2002. Now, I saw them in the TV show, so that would have been 2002 when they appeared there. I don't know if they originally appeared in the manga or not. The only thing that appeared before the Ghost in the Machine, Superman the Animated Series episode, was the manga. So possibly they appeared there first. So I have no idea if the drones that Lex Luthor, that Brainiac used in Ghost in the Machine were inspired by the tachykoma from Ghost in the Shell. Now, when I was thinking about this, that brought to mind another case which goes back earlier than Ghost in the Shell, and it's not exactly the same, but there was a movie from 1984 called Runaway, which features Tom Selleck and Gene Simmons and Kirstie Alley. Tom Selleck's the hero, Gene Simmons is the bad guy, and I think Kirstie Alley played a scientist, and it's not a great film. I mean, it's probably a B movie is what it should be considered. Tom Selleck is a cop, and there's... honestly, I did not look up the plot, and I can't remember. What I remember is that there's these little creatures that crawl around, these little machine creatures that crawl around that looked a little like the creatures, a little. They weren't real big. They were like about the size of maybe a person's hand or maybe a little bigger than their hand. And I think they carried bombs and things like that. And so it's kind of a sci-fi, light type police thriller, and if you like 80s type action movies, it might be worth checking out. It's not a great film, but it made me think of, I thought of that when I was trying to figure out what might have inspired the creatures, the machines that Brainiac uses in Ghost of the Machine. I thought of that movie, and that's called Runaway, and it's 1984 is when it came out. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was from the other episode of Superman the Animated Series, Brave New Metropolis, and that I briefly mentioned Intergang. Intergang is a criminal organization in Metropolis. They had previously appeared in Tools of the Trade, and they were financed, or they were supplied with technology by Darkseid. Now, Intergang first appeared in comic books way back in the early 70s in Jimmy Olsen number 133. They also appeared in the animated shows, also in Young Justice, in an episode from the first season that I watched called Disordered, which was the episode that also featured the Forever People. I had forgotten that Intergang showed up there. But I just wanted to give a little more information, since I didn't go into any detail at all as to what Intergang was. So this is it for Justice League Unlimited Seasons 1 and 2 as far as the Cadmus storyline goes. I don't have any plans to talk about it anymore. I might do some future episodes on episodes of Superman the Animated Series. I don't have any plans to, but I could possibly, because there are some that I'd like to go back and watch again, and some that I haven't seen, because I haven't seen I think I've seen all of seasons 1 and 3, but I haven't seen all of season 2, or something like that. And I do plan on watching JLU season 3, and I do want to record episodes on that. I'm just not sure exactly when that's going to happen, possibly later in 2015, possibly in 2016. As far as other cartoons, I do have the DVD set for Young Justice Season 2. I do plan to watch that. I'm just not sure if I'm going to do any episodes on that, or if I'll try and cover all of it, or just a little bit of it, an episode here and there. I'm not sure. Now, what I do know that I'm going to be doing, what I'm going to have coming up soon, is at least 2 episodes on the first season of Knights of Sidonia, which is an anime series that is currently available on Netflix. That's it for episode 87 of Dave Talks Comics. Dave Talks Comics can be found on the web at davetalkscomics.com and facebook.com/DaveTalksComics. On Twitter at DaveTalksComics. Email can be sent to davetalkscomics@gmail.com. Next time on Dave Talks Comics, I will be talking about Legion of Superheroes, The Great Darkness Saga. I'm Dave. Thank you for listening.